For me, it was the letter I. It was the letter I. And in Texas, you don't really hear a lot of I. In small towns, it becomes I. Hi, my name is Brian Giesenschlag. I'm the pre and post game host for the Columbus Blue Jackets on Bally Sports, the pre and post game host for the Cincinnati Reds on Bally Sports, and you're listening to Into the Stands.
So if you are into sports in and around Central Ohio, you've probably seen him talking before or after Jackets and Reds games. We have Brian Giesenslaw with us today. How you doing, Brian?
What's going on, Dave? I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad. Jumping right into it. Let's start out by kind of telling everybody who you are, what it is you do, and the teams that you work for.
Yeah, so I have what I think is kind of the perfect setup in that I have a year-round schedule, which a lot of people who do what I do or do something similar to what I do, it's pretty seasonal, and we're all grateful for any of that we can do. But I got a year-round schedule. I've got two sports, and what I really like about that is not only the variety of the two sports that I get to do, because I love both baseball and hockey, but I really like that it lines up in two different cities. And some people say, "Oh, well, you spend a lot of time on the road." I live in Cincinnati. I was here first before I got these gigs, and so I live in Cincinnati. Most of the work I do, the Reds, baseball season's about twice as long as hockey season, just in terms of number of games. So it makes more sense for me to be here for my work with the Reds. And so people say, "Oh, you drive to Columbus a lot," and I drive to Columbus a lot. But I really like what that provides in terms of just a variety of. It's a different market, it's a different fan base, it's different people, and I feel really fortunate and blessed to be able to get to experience both teams and both sports in two different places. It kind of really helps me with my mental aspect of all this, of just the variety that it provides.
Yeah. So can you kind of share a little bit about your journey in becoming a journalist and broadcaster? Was it always the plan to get into sports, or did you kind
Yeah.
of get an opportunity at some point and realize that you really enjoyed it?
Yeah, no. My oldest is in college right now, so I've shared this with him and some other people his age, that it's okay, and most people hit college and aren't exactly sure what they want to do. I was kind of the exception in that I never deviated. This is always what I wanted to do. Now, did it always look like this as a studio host or a pregame host? No, it didn't. But I was just the very simple classic story of a kid growing up who played all sports, who loved sports, and thought for a long time that I would have a career uh, doing that, playing sports. And once I figured out that that wasn't going to be the path for me, I just wanted to find a way to stay close to it and stay around it, a lot like what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
And so I went into college probably about halfway through high school, pretty much locked in that this was option A and option B and option C. And if I exhausted all those, maybe I would pivot, but I wasn't going to go in and not give it all I had to do what I did. I grew up uh, in a tiny town in central Texas, and so high school football was king. That was pretty much year round, and so I played and was good, not great, but was good for that time in that place. And that was kind of where it all started. So I did the old thing where back then, it was a long time ago, I wrote a letter to my local television sportscaster that I knew, who was about an hour away, and ironically enough, he got back to me. He kind of gave me some advice through high school and college, and to this day is still a friend and kind of a mentor, and somebody that I stay in touch with. So fortunately, I kind of knew what I wanted to do and got some help along the way that helped me stay on that path.
That's great. So the person that recommended I talk to you is your broadcast partner, Jean-Luc Grandpierre. And
Love that guy.
he told me, I think everybody does. He told me that the one thing I need to ask you, and it kinda connects in with what you just said,
Yeah.
is about your accent. Being from
Mhm.
Texas,
Yep.
he said there's a story behind that, or what happened with that?
Funny that the guy with the French Canadian accent
I
wants
know,
to know
right?
about my accent, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, he's got an odd fascination with something that he doesn't really know about because he's been trying to locate or get me to share with him video from 30 years ago that uh, might show his partner in a little bit different light.
yeah,
Uh, you know, we've all got that. We've all got those videos and those things that we've done that you go, man, I hope nobody ever sees that.
yeah, that
Uh,
they kinda get locked down on the phone and yeah,
exactly, exactly. Well, here's the story, and it's not that interesting. He just kind of likes to talk about it. Um, yeah, growing up in a small Texas town, um, a long time ago, things, I sounded differently. Um, and it was who I was, and I'm proud of it. I love where I'm from, and I love all of that. But as I started to, when I got out of college, I went to Baylor in Waco, Texas, and when I got out of
mhm,
college, my first two jobs were at local television stations in Waco, where I had been, and it was great. Some of the best times I've had. I was a weekend sports guy at two different stations there, and man, I loved it. So aside from the crazy last name, which also fit perfectly with small town Texas, there's a
yeah,
lot of German community there, so that was not a problem. I sounded like I was from a small town in Texas, and I got my first real move was there was a cable startup station in Dallas, and Dallas is a huge market, and it was about an hour and a half away, and uh, my now wife was in Dallas at the time when we were dating. So I really wanted to get there and I wanted to get this gig. So I got this job doing news at a cable startup in Dallas. But that cable startup had recruited people from all over the country and brought different people in to do different things. And one of our executive producers was from Massachusetts, and she did not like me. She didn't like the way I looked or the way I sounded. Told me my accent was terrible. Now she didn't hire me; she was just stuck with me once I got there.
yeah.
And so she made a big deal to our bosses that that I couldn't be on the air sounding the way I sounded. And so I'm making it more of a story than it was. Our bosses said, "Hey, how about you go to a speech coach?" And I basically went, I think I went twice. I think I
Mhm,
met with someone twice for about an hour each time. And they basically just identified a couple of things that were, a couple of things about the way that I spoke that made it sound like I was from a small town in Texas. And they said, listen, this may have played in Waco, but if you ever want to work in a larger market or go somewhere else, you're going to have a hard time if you sound like this.
yeah.
So it was not a big deal. They pointed out a couple of things. There was no drastic, immediate change. I think I kind of slowly started to work my way out of the accent from small town Texas. And it turned out to me at the time, I wasn't excited about it. It turned out to be a great thing for me because who knew? I didn't know I was going to go to, Ohio and work.
Yeah.
I didn't know I was going to try to get jobs other places. It turned out professionally to be a very good thing. But Jean Luc Grandpierre is dead set on trying to locate and expose some video of his partner 30 years ago with a Texas accent.
I feel like he's imagining the video has you in a
Oh,
cowboy hat and
oh,
everything too, right?
100%,
Yeah,
100%. And I'd like to be clear. I didn't. I try to be very authentic and true to myself, right?
yeah,
Like I said, I love where I'm from and how I grew up.
absolutely.
And so somebody might say, "Oh, well, so what I'm hearing now from him is just him faking it." He's not. No, it's not that. It was a couple of small things, and I'm thankful for the process and kind of how it all played out. But it does make for a funny story.
And it's amazing how accents work because, you know, the company I was at previously, we talked a little bit about it. I work from home full time as as an electrical engineer, and The company I worked for before was actually based out of Minnesota, so
Mhm.
all day long, I'm just talking to people from Minnesota,
And you can tell.
and so all of a sudden, you start kinda stretching your O's out a little bit and,
Exactly,
start
exactly.
start
For
picking it up
me,
just from
it was the
talking to them.
letter I.
Yep.
It was the letter I. And in Texas, you don't really hear a lot of I. In small towns, it becomes I.
Mhm.
And once that got out of my once it was brought to my attention, it was not a hard thing to change. But you know what? If you work in Boston and you sound like somebody from Boston, that's great. If you
Yeah.
work in Philly or Chicago or New York, that's great. But if you do want to kind of not pigeonhole yourself to something, it's best to kind of land somewhere in the middle. So
So how did you end up going from Texas to Ohio? Or did you just see there was openings available and went for them, or was there a connection there?
yeah, so I'm working in local sports, doing the 6 and 10 or 6 and 11 o'clock news, and it was great. I loved it. It's what I always wanted to do. But I figured that wasn't going to come without moving a couple of times. I wasn't anxious to move. My whole family's in Texas. My wife is from Texas. Um, but the cable channel that I just talked to you about started to reach its demise after about, I guess it was probably 5 or 6 years. And I needed a job, and I looked for things in Texas, and all of a sudden I got a call from the local Fox affiliate in Cincinnati, Ohio, and it was not even on our radar. But I started looking at it and thinking about it, and I thought, okay, here's our move, um, and so yeah, so we left Dallas in. I left in the actually I started in January of '05 here at the local Fox affiliate. And honestly, my wife said, and she was totally on board, but she said, 5 years, and then maybe we move back somewhere to Texas. And I went, sure. And that was obviously almost 20 years ago, and we're here, and we're thankful because it's been a great place to have our family and work for almost the last 20 years.
That's awesome. So throughout your career, have there been, moments or games or situations that
Hmm.
stick out to you most and as most memorable?
Yeah,
Or yeah.
yeah. The coolest thing about what we do, and probably the reason that I really wanted to do this, was just to get to be there, to be at the games and to be in the moments. And uh, I never wanted to be just a studio host. When I first started, in the '90s, people said, "Oh, you do sports, you must want to work at ESPN." And I'll admit that certainly was on my radar at the
Yeah.
time, but I didn't want to be a sports center anchor because those guys were just in the studio in Connecticut all the time. They rarely were out at events. And so I loved the fact that in my local job that I got to go to things. So when I was in Waco, uh, in addition to covering the Southwest Conference and what became the Big 12 Conference, which was a blast, and great high school sports, which is near the top of my list of what I loved to do back when I did that. We covered the Cowboys kind of from a distance. We were an hour and a half from Dallas, but we would do training camp and we would do Dallas home games. And so I remember some of those Thanksgiving games, the Randy Moss game with the Vikings on
Mm.
Thanksgiving in Dallas. I think it was '98. I was on the sideline in the end zone with our photographer when all that was happening, and you just kind of get a taste of being there. So I enjoyed that. Since I've been here, obviously, some of the big moments with the Reds and their playoff teams 10 years ago, being in the ballpark for that, um, those kinds of moments. I love that, but I love being in the moment and being at the games. But I love when it slows down and getting to talk to those people who were involved and do some of those interviews. And that's what's been another really great part about doing what I do is getting to meet some of those people and talk to them.
Yeah. So we did talk a little bit before the episode about kind of your role
Hmm.
and how you're not talking about, you're not talking to people about the way the team's playing, or you're not in there interviewing these guys that are involved. So can you kind of describe your role as a studio host?
Yeah, well, we are in there. On home games. Every morning for morning skate, we're in the room and we do those interviews and we talk to those guys and we talk to the coaches. I really like. I don't get as much of an opportunity right now, but with the Reds, I get more of an opportunity to do more sit down stuff and talk to guys, players, and coaches. So we're in the clubhouse every day, and so the way I separate it is there's the day to day where whether it's baseball or hockey, we're in the clubhouse or in the room with the Jackets, talking to those players about that day or about some trend or about something that's happened, and then we have those guys on the desk sometimes in hockey. But I also like when we get to separate a little bit and do something more long form that's outside of um, the game day realm, I guess. Like when
And
the Jackets completely unexpectedly signed Johnny Gaudreau, right?
yeah,
When he came to Columbus for the first time for that first day to meet the media, um, we got to sit down with Gaudreau in a separate room, everything's set up, and we kind of got that first interview about being in Columbus and how the heck did this happen? This was not what anyone saw playing out for Gaudreau, and we got to sit down and talk to him. In a previous life in Texas, when I was at the cable channel, we did some long form stuff, and I got to sit down with Nolan Ryan and a lot of Texas legends and some of those things. And we did a talk show where a lot of the current Cowboys would come in, and I love just talking to those people and doing those things. Um, so as what I do right now as a host for pre and post game, that gives me the avenue to be involved on a daily basis and to dig and kind of take things where I want to take it. But I really do like the storytelling aspect of it. I do features for the Reds. I do feature stories as well. And that's very high on my list of what I love to do and why I love to be involved the way that I am.
and it wasn't you that did the story, but it was on the pregame show a couple weeks ago, and I'd be mad at myself if I didn't mention the story about Drake.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, who doesn't love a golden retriever that wants
right.
to play hockey? It's Air Bud for hockey.
Yeah, exactly. So,
It's great.
Mets did that story, and Mets
Yeah,
does most of the features for the Jackets, and does a great job. He
absolutely.
and he and John Ebright, but I get to do a lot of that during baseball season for the Reds, and those are the things. That's the difference. What I just talked about. It wasn't, it was Provy's dog. It's Ivan
Yeah,
Provorov's dog, but we didn't ask. That was not about Ivan Provorov, the hockey player. That's what people don't see day to day is Ivan Provorov the person and maybe what his life looks like and how it's not that dissimilar from everyday life for most of us.
and that I mean, that's kind of the basis of this show is kinda just getting to go
Yeah,
behind
exactly.
the personality that you see on TV. So still sticking with kinda interviewing athletes and coaches and other figures in
Hmm.
sports, are there specific strategies or anything that you have when you do that? Like, was there when you first started interviewing coaches, say,
Hmm.
I know that's a really stressful thing to start getting into.
Yeah,
Um, do you have any advice for people who are, you know, maybe in school for
yeah,
journalism, broadcasting, to go in and not necessarily be afraid to ask their question in the fear
right.
that, a coach is gonna find it, disrespectful or not insightful enough or something along those lines? Because there's a lot of coaches now that will call you out for that.
Yeah, and thank God for those coaches.
Absolutely.
I love it. Here's my thing. If to younger people and people already in our profession doing what we do is prepare, prepare, prepare. There are a lot of people that think, "Oh, I watched the game last night. So I'll just go roll up to this coach or this player, and I can handle that. We'll just talk about it." Think about what you're going to say before you have those interactions with coaches or players. Think long and hard. And when you have a
Mhm.
coach like John Tortorella, one of those guys I was talking about,
Yep.
people say, "Oh, that must have been so hard to have to deal with Torts on a daily basis and how he treats." Torts as a coach is about accountability with his players.
Yep.
And a few coaches out there create accountability with the media. And I love those guys. There's so many coaches that are easy to talk to. and very respectful and very patient of everybody. And I appreciate those. That's probably how I would be if I were a coach. I mean, they're just good guys. But the coaches like Torts or the players like Scott Rowland when he was with the Reds, you better know what you're going to say, how you're going to ask it. It better be well thought out. It better make sense before you approach those people because they're going to create that accountability. So, as a reporter or as a host, here's what I would tell younger people too: questions matter. I love watching an interview, even if it's not sports, with very well thought out, not questions that you would expect. When someone asks a question and I go, wow, that's a great question. Well, I'm glad they thought of that. I hope I think of things like that. What I lament right now about the business is that that's kind of gone away. Everybody has a microphone, everybody has their phone, everybody has access, and I'm all for that. But people jump into all these situations. There's less professionalism in how they think the job should go. And you're getting me off on a tangent here. But the show Real Sports on HBO that just went away was my all-time favorite sports show. It was
Mm,
serious sports storytelling, and they did it in a way that set them apart from everyone else. People hate Bryant Gumbel. He's probably because he's smug, he's abrasive, I probably wouldn't be friends with him.
yeah.
But I love the way that after each of the stories on Real Sports, he always had the best questions of the reporters. And they were well thought out. When he was involved doing a story, he asked people the best questions. And to your point, he asked the difficult questions. He asked the questions that were obvious that a lot of people are afraid to wade into.
Yeah.
But what I tell people is questions matter. So even what we do, and even in our role as, we have a player to the desk after the Jackets win at
Yep.
Nationwide Arena, I want to put some thought into my questions. I want them to be questions that sound good. First off, I want them to be questions because a lot of reporters or young people don't ask questions. Talk about that play in the third period. That's not a question.
Yeah.
It's a statement, and
Yep.
it's lazy. It's
Yeah.
lazy on the part of a reporter or a host.
It's letting the athlete do the work.
Right, but it's lazy. What are you there for if you just say, talk about that play? Ask me something specific about a specific play or about a specific aspect of the game or something that you saw, and let's have that kind of a conversation. Um, and so there's that. And so we try to think of, or I try to think about that in those terms. I tell kids and young people, questions really matter. Be a good interviewer. Ask good questions, and that's probably way more than you wanted on that topic, but it kind of got me going.
No, I appreciate it. So, you know, all good. Deep breaths, deep
Deep
breaths.
breaths.
So like then in your role, how important is having a partner like John Luke? So
Mhm.
obviously based on kind of how we talked about him earlier and kind of going back and forth,
Yeah,
it's not only are you guys coworkers, but you guys are clearly friends.
yeah.
And how easy does he make your job being that close of a friend
Mhm.
and also being as knowledgeable about the game as he is?
Right.
And I'll admit I'm not a Reds fan. I'm a Guardians fan. So
Mhm.
I don't really watch any of the Reds coverage, but do
Yeah.
you have that with the Reds as well?
Sure. Sure. Now, could you do the job without being good friends with your broadcast partner? Absolutely. If you
Mhm.
if you think of yourself, if you have two professionals, then yes, and that happens a lot. Not everybody you see on TV is buddy buddy with whoever they're talking with.
Yeah.
I have the privilege of being good friends with both of my broadcast partners, Jean-Luc Grandpierre and then former Reds pitcher Sam LeCure. Um, does it make it easier? Yes, but you don't want to fall back and get lazy on, this is my buddy over here. I don't really have to, he's going to bail me out. I can throw him anything and he'll talk forever. So maybe I don't prepare as much or look into as much about what I'm going to say. Don't do that. But you mentioned roles. You said roles. I very much take my role seriously. The pregame show and the postgame show, that's not about me. That's about the game and the players and what happens. And it's not about me in that I don't have the same perspective that my analyst former player has. And so I think his opinion and his what he has to say about said game is way more important than
Hmm.
mine. That doesn't mean that mine's not a part of it. It doesn't mean it doesn't shape the show, but that's not my number one role. My number one role is to guide the show in a way that flows and makes sense and tee those guys up for the best that I can get out of them in terms of opinion or analysis about what they just saw. Um, and so there's a little bit of a traffic cop in it from a TV standpoint, in that you have to get on the air, you have to get to break, you have to manage the discussion, you have to listen to the producer, keep everything on time, make sure that the promos and ads that go in different places happen at the right time and in
Hmm.
the right way, and it has to feel natural. It has to feel like it flows. That's my number one role. But I want Jean Luc or Sam or whoever I'm sitting next to, Jody Shelley, I want to get the best out of them. And so going back to the question thing, knowing their perspective as former players, as Jean Luc has coached some, I want to find the right things to ask them to get them where they can pull the best out of their reservoir that they can about that game. And I want to engage the conversation. It needs to be a conversation.
Yeah. So what does your show prep for yourself look like leading up
Yeah.
to a show?
I consume everything I can reading on a daily basis. Non game days, game days, I still want to read not just beat writers. I want to read national guys. I want to read league stuff. I want to read player profiles. I want to know as much as I can, because in this day and age, the industry has evolved so much where, 30 years ago when I started doing this, the highlights were gold,
Yeah.
because you had to see the highlights on the 6 or 10 o'clock news or the 11 o'clock Sports Center. You couldn't get them instantly on your phone. You couldn't get it instant. So anyway, as that started to happen, highlights become less relevant
Hmm.
because they're everywhere. No one's waiting to see them. Now, even interviews with players and coaches have become less relevant because you see them everywhere. You see them before the game on your phone. You see them during the game. You see them after the game, right away, instantly. You don't wait
Yeah,
for anything. So, what we do, we need to find a way more and more to come up with something else that somebody didn't get it right away. Somebody didn't know that. Somebody didn't have that perspective or that thought. Anything that I can come up with preparing for the pregame show, during the game, preparing for the postgame show, that we can bring out and highlight, that somebody might go, oh, I didn't know that, or I didn't
mhm,
see that, or wow, that's a great tie in. Those are the things I look for. And I look for them just by casting a broad net to know as much as I can know, that at some point I'm going to go, oh, okay, that's something I'm going to make a note of. And that's part of my prep, is going into the day and going into the show with a list of little notes. Some of them I'll use, some of them I won't, but you always want to have something you can go to if you have that opportunity during a show.
for sure. So, what is you mentioned, you like to talk to read the local beat writers, national
Mhm.
writers. Is there a source that you rely on more than others, or a source that, someone like, just a fan that goes to Blue Jackets games might not be
Yeah.
aware of, that you like to look at for your information and stats and just ways to stay updated?
I would say the first thing I would say is you have to be careful.
Yeah.
Um, for information and stats, that's a little more straightforward. You can find stats, and there are a lot of people that do great deep analytic stuff and stats that you can find. But more and more, you have to be careful with social media who you believe,
Yeah.
because anyone can say anything and throw things out there. And I don't want to be associated. I don't want to be guilty of being that lazy of just seeing something and it's shiny and exciting and it's news and going, ooh,
Mhm.
retweet or say that. I always look at deeply. If you
Yeah,
see something on the internet that goes, oh, that might be big news. You don't want to be first without looking to see who the source is.
yeah.
And
Perfect.
most times, you want to talk to somebody in old school journalism. Now you can't as much. But anyway, the people that I read are the people that I trust.
Yeah.
Aaron Portzline for the Jackets and the beat guys, Svoboda for the team, Brian Hedger, Mark Scheig, all those guys are around, and I know their work and I trust their work. The national guys, the guys you trust. So there's no one go to for me. There's no one source that I go to, but I just try to make sure that what I'm reading or who I'm talking to and asking those questions to, I trust them and their information and what they say. And all of that kind of goes together because everybody's different. Everybody reports from a different perspective.
Yeah.
That kind of feeds what I want to go into with, and that is the most broad knowledge that I can of what I'm about to talk about.
And perfect example of that we saw just a week ago with the outdoor game. You know,
Hmm.
earlier about a month ago,
Yeah.
it was a buddy of mine, Jason, who writes for the Hockey News.
Hmm.
Um, is he was one of the first people to
Yep.
actually put a date to it, and it was kind of, I don't want to say crazy. I mean, obviously, I trust Jason because
Uh,
he's a friend of mine.
right.
But as an outsider looking in, it was kind of amazing how quickly, as soon as his report came out, it seemed like every media outlet was just running with it
Right.
and sharing it, and it's like it was kind of amazing to me just how quickly that took off, and it was all nothing was confirmed by anybody yet.
Hmm.
He ended up being right, but at the at the end of
Right.
the day, it was amazing how that just kinda took off. It's like you said,
Just got to be careful, man,
Yep.
because a couple of clicks and it's off and running. So,
Absolutely.
so yeah, be careful.
So, it's a really rapidly evolving landscape in sports journalism.
Hmm.
How do you adapt to the new technologies and platforms? What have you seen? Whether, obviously Twitter and Facebook and Instagram have all been huge
Hmm.
innovations in media and broadcasting, but that included with how the things that you do for work directly, whether it's in studio things,
Hmm.
what are your feelings on new technology? What is some of the new technology that fans might not be aware of that you are working with in the studio? And how do you kinda handle all those changes?
Yeah. Well, like most things, I think, you know, new technology is probably the best and the worst of what happens.
Yep,
The worst in that, as I've said, it can take you away uh, from doing some of the work that maybe you did previously. It can allow you sometimes to be lazy. Um, those are some of the downsides of social media and the things that we've dealt with in news.
yeah,
Um, I like that in my role right now, we are not in the news breaking business. It's not my job to break stories on the Jackets or the Reds because I do have, we do as a broadcaster have a relationship with the teams and a relationship with the players and coaches, and they know I'm not there to dig and try to find something that potentially they don't want reported. They
yeah,
know when they see me that that's not what we're there for. There are people that's their sole, that they're driven by breaking news or discovering things that they would like to report and be first. Um, I'm glad that I'm out of that,
yeah,
because the people that do that, like I said, now they have this ability to really quickly um, do those things, and it doesn't always go well. So there's that. So I'm for social media. For me, I'm not a huge social media guy. On
mhm,
Twitter, you won't find anything. I don't sit there all day and retweet
yeah,
or throw out thoughts. I don't game tweet. Nice pass by Gaudreau. I don't do that. If I'm on there, I have something to say or something to share, and and it's something that I felt like needed to be said or shared or wanted to share. and it's not just kind of an everyday thing.
Yeah.
I don't put personal stuff on there. You're not going to find stuff about my family on there, or the food that I eat, or the places that I go, or the vacations that I take. You're not going to find that on my Twitter. I literally use it for a news source and for a source of enjoyment of things that I like to read or
Yeah.
consume. And so, in some ways, I'm not optimizing that the way that I could if I wanted to build more of a brand personally.
Yeah.
But that's just not where I've gone. In terms of technology, with what we do, man, the cameras, the angles, the what historically has kind of been the telestrator. There have been so many advances in the things that we can do with player tracking or numbers or those things. All of those things, if they enhance the game and the way that I like to see it, um, I'm all for it. And we try to use those things, but you don't want to beat people over the head with something like that and force feed them something like that that takes away from the game. Our
Hmm.
producers always say our number one priority is the game. When we're broadcasting the game, when we're covering the game, that's going to take us in some different directions sometimes with the stories or with the technology that we can use that we can enhance the game. But our number one priority is the game, and we want to use those things to not get too far away from our number one priority.
What changes or trends do you like see forthcoming in your, the broadcasting
Yeah.
world? And one of the big ones that I've seen is obviously streaming services.
Hmm.
There's a lot of uproar about, are streaming services good? Are they bad? Is it getting too far where now, we have Apple has the MLS where you have to have Apple TV Plus, and then it's an
Hmm.
additional subscription for that for MLS, and then, we have the Big Ten network now where it's, you have to have cable or subscribe to the Big Ten network, and then if you want to watch certain sports, you got to have Big Ten Plus. And what's your opinion on that, on the streaming services side of things?
Hmm.
What mainly what changes or trends do you see in the future, and do you think they're beneficial?
Yeah, I will leave most of that alone, obviously,
Yeah.
because of the situation we're in with a very rapidly changing landscape for how games are done and those things. I will say this, just an acknowledgement that yes, things are changing and there are different options. And some of them I think, some of them I think are good, and some of them I think will probably circle back um, to maybe a little bit more of the way things have been. In terms of changes, I will give you this for baseball. Um, the thing that changed in some ways the way we view and do baseball games are the
Mhm.
rules changes.
Yeah.
Uh, the change with the pitch clock that sped up the games, and the goal was never a shorter big league game. The goal was eliminate the dead time. A
Yes.
shorter game is the byproduct of that, but it wasn't the goal of the rules changes weren't to speed up the game. It was just to eliminate the downtime. And so it did all of that. It eliminated the downtime and it shortened the games, and that changed the way we broadcast. Um, there was no longer the breathing room within a 9 inning broadcast to do some of the things that we did, to have some longer conversations with your game analyst. Or we used to do this. This is just a simple for the Reds in the eighth inning, top of the eighth inning, the game broadcast used to kick it down to us on the desk at the ballpark or on the desk in the studio coming back from a commercial break. And
Yeah.
literally, we would take 30 seconds and say, hey, uh, Brian Giesenschlag, Sam LaCure, we're here getting ready for Reds Live post game. Be sure and join us. Don't forget the post game show's coming up next. We'll have this and this, and we'll see you then. That went away last season because the game moved so quickly coming back from a commercial break and a change of the half inning. We no longer had 30 seconds to spare because
Yeah.
you had to get right back. A guy was in the batter's box right when you came back from commercial, and the game goes on. So some things like that have changed the way we do the games. And all of those things will play into how the games are consumed, baseball, hockey, whatever it is, moving forward with whatever service, whether it's over the air or streaming. Um, this is a shift in how we view and consume sports, without question.
Yeah.
What it's going to be exactly or how it's going to look, I'm not sure everybody really knows yet. There are a lot of options, but you can very much feel, and we could see coming, a shift in how the games are done.
Yeah. And I mean, personally, I love the idea of the streaming services. The biggest thing for me is just cost.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody cut cable because it was too expensive, and I'm worried
Mm-hmm.
that, um, all these different services are going to end up costing more. So, really, I have two questions left for
Mm-hmm.
you. So, first is, are you able to share any kind of behind the scenes or interesting experiences from your time covering sports that just stick out to you? Something that you know left you thinking, what just happened,
Right.
or that was awesome, or something
Right.
along those lines.
Yeah. I mean, there's always I can't believe that just happened moments, or sometimes when you have an opportunity to interview someone or be around someone that, to that point, if I've been doing this a long time, if I were to try to tell you that I still don't get a little bit of, ooh, wow, that's whoever that is, I absolutely do.
Mhm.
But that's why I love it. That's why I'm still in it. I don't ever want to get numb to the fact that I loved sports growing up and these guys were my heroes. And now I get to meet and speak with some of them. I don't ever want to lose that. That's still there. So there's that. But in terms of just a specific story, so when I worked at the local Fox here in Cincinnati for 8-ish years, um, when we first got to town. So this was the Carson Palmer, Chad Johnson
Yeah.
era with the Bengals, and we did a thing with Chad every week. Was a sponsored thing we did called Chad's Corner, where we got a little bit of exclusive one-on-one time with Chad to be Chad and do what he did. And it was always really entertaining and it was fun. And, we did some things in Cincinnati with him and where we ran around town and he took us and we got to put together some fun content for that. Well, he had a book come out, um, a book that he did that largely told the story of how he grew up in Miami and was raised by his grandmother. And his grandmother in the book, he played it up, became this great colorful figure of how she raised him and her
Yeah.
personality and who she was. And so we asked him one time, I said, hey, and I had to run this by our bosses, obviously. I said, hey, can we come to Miami sometime and talk to your grandmother and see where you grew up and just get a little bit of that of your background. And Chad was elusive, to say the least, when you wanted to get him to commit to something. So we
Yeah.
started asking him after games and after practice, a month before the season started, into the season, he would always go, yeah, we'll talk about it later. Yeah, we'll talk about it later. Yeah, sure, we'll do that. We'll talk about it later. And finally, I was just going, Chad, man, we've got to make some plans here. This is not
Yeah.
driving down to the stadium to make this happen. We're flying to Miami and our bosses are committing to this. And we had talked to our bosses and they said, look, if you can get him to do this, you can go. And so the bye week is coming up and we had talked about doing it on the bye week. And we were at the stadium after practice and we're trying to nail him down. And I'm going, Chad, we have to know today,
Yeah.
can we do this and how are we going to do it? And he jogs past us and he goes, yeah, I'll see you in Miami, you know, Wednesday. Call me. And I went, okay, now what do we do? What
Yeah.
do we do?
Yeah.
We're stuck. And so, because it wasn't a firm commitment, it was by no means was there a plan at
No.
all. And I wanted to plan it. I wanted to say, we'll meet you here, we'll
Yep.
go here, we'll interview you here. And so we kind of rolled the dice and, credit to our boss for letting us roll the dice. And so we booked the flights and we got down there, and the day before I called him or texted him and said, hey, we're coming. Can we still, and we still got almost nothing. And it must have been the night before or the day of, he said, sure, meet me here. And I went, when? Well, he gave us like this 4 hour window. And I went, oh, this is going to be a goose chase. We're
Oh
never going
yeah.
to do this. And we ended up going to Miami very cautiously, going, okay, we're going to get something or we're going to get nothing. And we met him. He had us meet him at a restaurant, South Beach, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And he's smoking a cigar and talking to people. And I went, okay, at least we got something. We got
Yeah.
something. We got there and he was nice. Hey, glad you guys are here. And I wanted to go, okay, Chad, we're going to be here for 3 days. What can we? And he said, well, let's go here. And so we went to his high school with him.
Yeah.
And then we were there and I thought, okay, he's going to cut us loose. And he goes, well, let's go talk to my grandmother. So then we go to his house, talk to his grandmother. I thought he was going to cut us loose. So we get this one good day of stuff. And I went, that's great.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, he goes, you guys want to go to dinner? So sure. So we go to dinner. And then he goes, at the end of the night, I think we're going to, Chad, thank you so much for taking the time. He goes, what are you guys doing tomorrow? Why don't you come back over here? We end up getting, with no plan, no itinerary. We spent about 2.5 days with Chad Johnson. We went to his high school. We went to a football game. We went to the Pee Wee Fields where he played and met Luke Skywalker, who was one of his coaches from Two Live Crew, was one of his coaches when he was a kid.
Yeah.
We got the grandmother. We got his agent. We went to breakfast. We went out at night with. It turned into this big thing. And at the end of the 3 days, our photographer, we were sitting there going, can you believe that just happened? We just, with no plan at all, we came
Yeah.
down here and we got all of that. And it ended up being several pieces of a story, and it was good, but not the way we like to operate as
Absolutely.
journalists, because there was no plan, but it just kept rolling and it turned into something great.
That's awesome. So, what advice do you have for anybody looking to get into the sports broadcasting world? Somebody who's getting ready to go into college or getting ready to come
Yeah,
out of college. What advice do you have?
yeah. Find look for the things that seem different. We just talked about how much things are changing. Don't chase something that hasn't evolved yet. Look for
Mhm.
the things that are different. I just went on a college visit several months ago with one of my kids, and they had a student panel there for what they were doing, and it wasn't sports, but it applies. One of the kids said, I'm studying this, but what one of my professors likes to say, this kid was a sophomore, is the job that I will have within this area probably doesn't exist yet.
Hmm.
And that's what we're preparing for, the job that doesn't exist yet. And my advice would be to anyone that wants to get into any kind of the sports industry, look for the new and different and evolving ways that things are happening, and try to find your place and your niche in those areas, as opposed to some established traditional way, because as much as all of us don't like to admit it, things are changing drastically and
Yep.
rapidly, and a lot of the things we've always done that have been great, they're either not going to be as great or they may not exist. We've seen it with newspapers, we've seen it with local TV, we've seen it with radio. Some of
Yep.
the great things about this profession, and some of the great people that have worked and still work in all these areas, um, they've been hit hard with the way things have changed. And so I would advise young people to look down the road as opposed to what they see over the dashboard right now when they look ahead.
For sure. So, I have a couple quick hitter questions
Okay.
asking everybody who comes on just to kind of tie everything together. Um, they're kind of corny, but they work. If you could have dinner with any person, past or present, who would it be?
Oh man, that's a tough one. Um, man, I would say one of my childhood heroes was Michael Jordan. I would throw Jordan on that list, and I'm looking on the wall where I am right now in our office at home, and I would say Muhammad Ali.
Love it. Is there a TV show that you're currently watching?
Okay. So the caveat is I don't watch a lot of stuff. Uh,
Okay.
I like documentaries, and I like some. Well, I like documentaries. We'll put it that way. So I've
Yeah.
watched a lot of those, but I did just with the Jackets being off so much, we had some
Yep.
time, and my wife and I traveled a little bit, and so I did get into. I don't like Yellowstone, but I've liked some of the prequels, and so I
Okay.
just finished the 1923 with Harrison
Yeah.
Ford and Helen Mirren, uh, and it was pretty good.
Okay.
I did like that. I'm a sucker for westerns of anything of the western ilk, whether it's an old one or a newer one. But I don't like Yellowstone. It feels like a soap opera to me.
That's fair. Um, what is your favorite venue that you have worked in or been to?
So the beat writers in baseball that go to Wrigley Field on a regular basis don't like it because the press box is tiny and old. But I grew up loving Wrigley Field, and I've covered games there, you know, a few times over the years. I love Wrigley Field. I love the Giants, San Francisco Giants ballpark in San Francisco used to be Pac Bell Park or whatever it is now. I can't even
Mm,
remember. I love that
yeah.
ballpark because of where it is, and yeah, those two would probably be high on the list.
Okay. And final question. They're making a movie about your life. Who do you want to play you?
My initial reaction would be Denzel Washington. Um, he's my favorite actor, but since that probably wouldn't work that well from a from the standpoint of he and I are a little bit different looking. Uh, some people have told me that I look like Jason Statham, or Statham, is that his last name? I think.
I think so.
Uh, you know, stick any middle-aged bald guy out there, and that'll
Yeah.
work. That's it's probably not that hard.
What's funny is I think I'll have to go back and check, but I'm pretty sure John Luke said Denzel.
Oh, well, he probably
So
knows that I talk about Denzel Washington as being my favorite uh,
yeah,
actor.
for him. So
Oh, no.
yeah,
No, Denzel needs to play me. Jean Luc can come up with somebody else.
he could figure it
Somebody,
out.
yeah. Well, he can have. Yeah, we'll have to fight that one out because if it came right down to it, if there were no parameters, the greatest actor of my generation is Denzel Washington, and I would want him to play me.
Absolutely, Brian. I really appreciate it.
No, Dave, this was
Um,
fun. I appreciate it.
if you want to let everybody know where they can find you, and we'll get going.
You can find me pre and post game on Bally Sports for the Blue Jackets, and pre and post game on Bally Sports for the Reds. And like I said, I'm not huge on Twitter, but if you're interested, at B Giesenschlag, baby.
I appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks, man.
Enjoy the rest of the hockey season.
You as well.